Trials of Mana is Square Enix's 2020 remake of 1995's Seiken Densetsu 3, the sequel to the SNES's 1993 game Secret of Mana, and the third game in the Mana series. Prior to this, my only actual experience with the series was in playing through and mostly enjoying Secret of Mana some many years ago. I've also been a frequent listener to the Seiken Densetsu 3 soundtrack for a number of years. Outside of that, I have basically no experience with the Mana series. I have never played the original Seiken Densetsu 3, so I won't exactly be able to tell you how it stacks up, but I can and will at the very least tell you how I felt playing this one. Trials of Mana, unlike Final Fantasy VII-R, is a remake in a pretty true sense of the term. And as much of this might seem simplistic by today's standards, I would argue that that isn't exactly a bad thing. But let's start this review by taking a look at the one part of the game that isn't really simplistic. Let's start with the story. Now, when I say the story isn't exactly simple, I more so mean structurally. Trials of Mana features 6 playable characters, and before the game begins, you get to choose 3 of them to go on your journey with. The first character you pick will act as the party leader, and the story will start and end with their conflict. So what I get to kickstart my adventure with might be different from what 83.33% of you get to start your adventure with. I picked the spear-wielding Reese as my team leader, as she simply just seemed well-balanced. Her story begins in her hometown. We're given some background on her and her family, how she played matriarch to her younger brother Elliot after their mother died while birthing him. Within just minutes of starting the game though, the exposition comes to an end and the event that sets her on her hero's journey begins. Young and impressionable, insecure Elliot, after being emotionally manipulated by a couple of ill-meaning strangers into doing something that he shouldn't, ends up getting kidnapped. Of course, then it's up to Reese to follow the trail of the kidnappers, uncover their plots, and rescue her brother. A simple story for sure, but it's really all you need to get to work and start making your way through new dungeons and into new towns. The other 2 characters you pick to journey with are gradually introduced to you over the first 5 hours or so of the game. I picked Duran.
The name's Duran.
Duran. I picked Duran for a tank character and Charlotte as a healer. In retrospect, I really should have picked a mage, as Reese was enough of a tank herself, but hey, you live and learn. Upon meeting each of your new characters, you're given the opportunity to play new chapters that detail the events that brought them to you. In those, you get to see the conflict that set them off on their adventure, and the conflict you'll be helping them overcome as you journey. In my experience, all of their stories were as simple as the first. They only take about an hour to get through, and you don't get to keep any of the loot or experience you gain through doing them, but I'd recommend doing all of them just to get a clearer picture of your adventure. Beating the game once gives you the achievements for beating it with your 3 chosen characters, so if you're looking to platinum the game, 2 playthroughs are going to be a necessity, as well as completing some post-game content accessed by reloading your clear data. Now, this story and these heroes' journeys are all pretty generic, but I did say earlier that structurally there's something a little more tricky going on here. When games give players control over party permutations like this, they often run into an issue of making everything feel a little bit detached, like the party isn't a real party and they're not quite on unified adventures. Trials of Mana, to my surprise, mostly skirts this issue. Since the characters and story aren't a huge focal point as it is, the little bit that the party gets to interact with each other actually feels pretty well balanced out. But they have a little more help than most games like this by way of a special fairy character. In each of these heroes' journeys, the necessity arises to gain and restore power to the Sword of Mana. To guide this adventure, rather than having each character in their own storyline go through the same story beats and events with different dialogue, the characters instead all meet a fairy who guides their path and holds the important conversations with NPCs that allow you to progress and discover where to go next. So in each playthrough, the large events are mostly identical. In reality, this fairy, even though she only appears to push the plot along in a way that would help the writers not write 36 permutations of every line of every conversation, is the guiding force of the game and the true party leader. Of course, this means we don't have 6 entirely unique adventures as it may seem at first. We have 1 unique adventure, being upheld by 6 unique motivations. A brilliant solution to a monolith of a problem. Aside from that though, the story is nothing to write home about. The overarching plots, the characters, the character motivations, they're all the same generic folklorish tales we've heard time and time again. But that, in and of itself, can be somewhat refreshing in this day and age. And considering this is the rare example of the 25-hour JRPG, something I think many of us have likely been feeling a craving for as of late, It's definitely welcome every now and then. So yeah, the story itself, it is a little simple, but there is a unique and brilliantly handled slant to its narrative format that is anything but simple. So then, how do the dungeons and combat fare in this remake? Do their retro designs and mechanics still translate well to the modern day? Well, let's take a look. Trials of Mana, as it seems, plays a lot more like the Mana series and a lot less like the Trials series. Though we get a lot of tracks, or rather dungeons, to trek through, not once do they give us a bike to do it on. Though most of these are incredibly ordinary, at most maybe requiring you to push a button or pull a switch here and there, it's in the vast quantity of dungeons we find one of the game's most promising and encouraging qualities. No dungeon is especially large or complicated, and where we have so many of them, it establishes a great rinse and repeat formula that makes you feel like you're always making progress. The bite-sized nature just gave this unexpected sense of reward and encouragement to keep going for me, and it made it so that I never felt like I was idling in one place for too long. Though dungeons don't contain many diverging paths, there's a healthy amount of loot to collect as you go, so it always feels like you're gaining something. There's also an ongoing scavenger hunt throughout the game that kept me interested in looking around every corner for this little cacti guy. He has 50 locations total, of which I believe I found 42 or 43 of them. Every 5th time you find him, you get rewarded, and these rewards are very useful, from discounts at shops to occasional 2 to 3 times XP bonuses. This might not be for everybody, of course, as this form of gameplay is not what JRPGs are really known for these days, but I found it refreshing in its simplicity and pace. Since there's admittedly not much to interact with in these dungeons besides loot, most of our time here will be spent fighting off enemies in real-time combat. A lot of these enemies you'll notice early on are copied and pasted around the game, or they'll even level up the further you get into a dungeon. And where this could create a bit of monotony in other games, Trials of Mana does well by expanding the enemies' movesets as they level, so fighting them again doesn't really feel like you're retreading the same territory, which further utilizes Trials of Mana's greatest skill, of making its minimalistic adventure stay fresh. Having said that though, there is a brief period where I felt combat kind of dragged. Combat itself is pretty straightforward. Light attack combos with circle and strong attack combo enders with triangle. Strong attacks can be charged by holding the button for longer, which comes in great handy when destroying enemy shields to damage them directly. There is no block button, but the dodge button mapped to square is enough to get you out of most situations. Holding L1 brings up a hot menu where special attacks are sub-mapped to the face buttons. These special attacks require you to have charged your CS meter down here, which you get by collecting enemy drops after dealing damage to them. Moves that require MP and items can both be found on separate wheels accessed by pressing up and down on the D-pad. Items as well can be mapped to a quick access menu similar to your special attacks that can be accessed with R1. There is a full set of status effects and elemental weaknesses in play as well as an active day-night cycle, and depending on the day of the week you're on, certain elements will see increased bonuses. Trials of Mana also employs a lock-on function, but outside of flying enemies, I didn't find it too necessary. And you can also switch between your characters on the fly with L and R2. And they all play kind of different. Where I think the combat falters is just in its first 10 or so hours. Early on, combat feels really limited and lackluster. The CS meter takes too long to charge up, you haven't unlocked much magic yet, and you haven't studied into additional job classes yet either. This, for the first stretch of the game, boils combat down to the absolute bare minimum light and heavy attacks and some dodges. In that regard, it can feel a little boring for a little longer than desired. As you level up, you gain points that you can distribute into 5 different categories to each party member. These points help unlock new skills and abilities to get special perks or gain CS at a faster rate, so the monotony of combat becomes less of an issue as the game goes along. Around level 20, you can study into a new job class, adding new special moves to your characters, and granting greater control over the character build as well. You can do this again around level 40, and then once more after that in the post-game. It felt to me the further into the game I got, the faster I leveled up, which in my experience with RPGs is a bit backwards to normal. I just felt in those first few hours, combat could have been helped along a little better, and that skills should have been handed out a little more generously. By the midpoint, despite my rather standard set of combat tools, I felt like I was on a bit of a power trip, which I kinda liked. Aside from 1 or 2 areas where the difficulty pinched a bit, likely as a result of me having no mage character, I found Trials of Mana on standard difficulty to be very easy. So if you're looking to put some extra work in, maybe consider bumping the difficulty up on this one. I should also note, I guess, that since this is an RPG, you do have a weapon and armor equip screen, and the game usually gives you enough money to fully spec your team without going broke. But I did run into one issue here. Shops only sell what your characters can equip, and every time you change job classes, they'll start selling new stuff. but some types of gear are far less common than others. Around mid-game, I upgraded Duran to a class that can use a shield. By the end of the game, I never found a single one. Now, I didn't go out of my way to revisit and scour every town and every shop looking for one, but you would think that on a normal playthrough where I do visit every shop I come across, look around every corner, and open every chest, I would have found at least one. But I never did. I looked online and apparently there's only a couple in the game anyway, and while they should be in a shop, they just weren't in the ones I visited. You can also get them through the seeding system. These things you collect around the game, plant at inns, and they grow into random gacha-style drops. But despite going through hundreds of them, I still never found one. Having left that armor slot empty my entire playthrough didn't really seem to bring me any challenge, but still, I chose that job class. It would be nice if I could take advantage of it as naturally as I was able to take advantage of all the others. So that about covers our story and gameplay, and there's only one last avenue to turn down. The avenue that feels the most modernized, but still not exactly like a modern title. Let's take a look at the technical aspects of Trials of Mana. We'll start here with the graphics. It's clear we're not breaking the bank or pushing the PlayStation 4 to its limits, but Trials of Mana is, in its own way, a pretty decent looking game. The art direction and character design make up most of why I think this game looks as nice as it does, but a bit of lighting here and there and some rich saturated color palettes simply make it pleasant to walk around in. Trials of Mana knows it's a collection of traditional heroes' tales, and the world feels like a traditional fantasy world for the heroes to trek through as well. Granted, a lot of this game is pretty low poly, textures aren't always the best, and some objects maybe clip and crash into each other more than we would like to see, and in that sense it can be ugly at times, but that shit ain't everything. At the end of the day, it pleased my eyes and brain to look at, so I'm gonna give it a pass. The only time I really got thrown off by an environment I doubt most people are ever going to notice. In this one town here, behind this building in the water, you can see two pieces of land breaking the surface. Come back to this town later after it had been attacked, and mysteriously these land formations are missing. I guess we can say that they got pulverized or something, but it really just feels like somebody deleted them by accident. In terms of performance, things were really solid for me, save for two areas. There was a late game dungeon that simply seemed to run at a lower frame rate than the rest, and when the day-night cycle switches, the game just completely shits the bed. That is, of course, because it's swapping out a bunch of NPCs, lighting effects, skybox changes, and enemies, and while it's painful to see it happen, your movement is locked at the time, stability resumes immediately after, and the game never crashes or anything, so it doesn't actually make a difference on the gameplay at all. The voiceovers, man.
Interesting question for a blind man, but I sense his location. Give me a moment.
A lot of you probably realized through my reviews in the past that unless the English in a game is especially bad, or unless Japanese feels like it fits the locale of the game better, I'll typically just leave a game in English. Well, language doesn't make a difference in this game world, but I certainly did not play in English. Maybe I didn't give the English enough of a chance, but around 30 to 40 minutes in, I came across a character who delivered their lines like they were in the middle of a yawn and they just left it in. At that point, I just had to bail. It already wasn't great, but that broke one too many straws.
Prince Elliot never knew his dearly departed mother before she passed.
The Japanese voice acting, while better, isn't very much better. But at least as somebody who doesn't speak the language, it's harder to tell and therefore less distracting.
シャルロット、やめろ、その子から手を離せ。
For me, the worst part of the Japanese track ended up being the terrible effects that they put on the voices, which, while usually meant to make it seem like the characters were speaking in the environments they appeared in, pretty much broke the illusion altogether and instead made me just picture somebody recording lines in a sound booth plugged into a heavy amount of reverb. The OST. As I said before, this was the only thing about the game I was intimately familiar with, and I think it's quite fantastic, especially for the generation. And much like how we can choose between English and Japanese voiceovers, we can also choose between the original or reorchestrated versions of the OST. While I started with the reorchestrated version and kept checking it out as I went along, I always ended up switching back to the original. The reorchestrated versions are great on their own, but I felt there was a certain bite and a certain urgency in the originals that just didn't translate on real instruments. Maybe that's a bias brought on by my familiarity with the original, but it really did feel like the better of the two to me. On the animation, well, combat animations are good, but cutscenes, not so much. A lot of them just look kind of awkward, cheap, and unfinished.
Hey, young prince! Psst.
Huh? Ooh, wow!
Now, feast your eyes on my multiplying trick! Ta-da!
Ooh, wow! Ooh, wow!
There's not much else to go over here, but before we get out of here, I just have one final thought to add. A thought that I didn't know where else to put in this video. I've long been curious about the original Seiken Densetsu 3, and this remake has only made me more curious. There's a lot of cutscenes in the game where you can tell they're trying to elicit an emotional response from you. The dialogue is emotionally charged, the OST is emotionally charged, the events in general are emotionally charged. But when you add in the awkward animation and directing paired with some kind of lousy voice acting, I just felt sucked out of it, and I found myself wondering if the original was more effective in a sort of less is more kind of way. Would I have felt more if I had the limited animation of sprites and the absence of voiceovers? Would I have felt more with nothing to work with besides the great OST, the emotionally charged writing, the subject matter, and my imagination to fill in the rest? And honestly, I think I may have. So in closing, where do I land with this? Curious though I may be how I would have reacted different to certain scenes in the original, I'm not disappointed with Trials of Mana at all. It's a simple game with a complex formula tackled brilliantly. Even though combat up front felt a tad weak, it kept me engaged by constantly giving me new things to tackle and making me feel rewarded for doing so. It's hard to say this is some kind of special game that everybody needs to go out and play, but if you desire shorter JRPGs every now and then, or have ever looked for a JRPG as a palate cleanser before, this fills the role in a way few other JRPGs can manage. And that, at least, is kind of special, right? The biggest missed opportunity here is this not being a Vita game. I actually feel like this would have been perfect for the system, but I get it. There's not many of us left who haven't decided to sign the form and take our Vitas off life support and just let them die yet, so I digress. And guys, that's all I'm going to say on Trials of Mana today. If you guys liked the video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you can. Links to all my socials are in the description below, and as always folks, thanks for watching.